A flight of prejudgment. The morning sun streamed through the glass walls of the bustling airport, illuminating a scene of orchestrated chaos. Travelers hurried to their gates, dragging suitcases and clutching boarding passes, their faces reflecting everything from anticipation to exhaustion. Among them walked Amara Grant, her stride steady and her expression calm, betraying none of the turmoil bubbling beneath the surface. Amara was a woman of quiet elegance. Her tailored navy blue pantsuit hugged her frame perfectly, her natural curls framed her face like a crown, and the vintage leather suitcase she carried added a touch of timeless sophistication. Yet, her presence seemed to invite unwelcome scrutiny. The glances began as she approached the check-in counter, and the air grew heavy with silent judgments. Behind the counter stood two airline staff members, Gina, a sharp-eyed woman in her mid-30s with a tight bun, and Carl, a young man who wore a perpetual smirk. Gina's professional demeanor faltered the moment her eyes fell on Amara. Her lips pursed slightly, and she straightened her posture, as if bracing for something unpleasant. "Good morning," Amara greeted, her voice warm yet assertive. She handed her first-class ticket to Gina, her hand steady, despite the disdain she could already feel radiating from the woman. Gina took the ticket without a word, her eyes scanning it with exaggerated slowness. She glanced at Amara, her expression betraying a flicker of doubt. "Flying first class?" Gina asked, her tone sharp, as if the mere idea was absurd. "Yes," Amara replied simply, her gaze unwavering. Gina turned to Carl and handed him the ticket. "Can you double-check this?" she said, loud enough for Amara to hear. Carl chuckled, holding the ticket up to the light as if it were a counterfeit bill. "It's legit," Carl said after a moment, his smirk widening. "Guess she's good to go." Amara's lips twitched in the faintest hint of a smile, though her patience was wearing thin. "Thank you," she said, reclaiming her ticket and stepping aside. As she moved to the luggage drop-off, she could hear their whispered remarks, punctuated by laughter. "Must have hit the jackpot or something," Gina muttered. Amara chose not to react. She had dealt with this kind of behavior all her life, subtle digs, condescending tones, and the ever-present assumption that she didn't belong. But today was different. Today, she had no intention of letting it slide. At the luggage counter, an older man named Frank greeted her with a grunt. He barely glanced at her as he snatched her suitcase and tossed it onto the conveyor belt with a force that made her wince. The suitcase teetered precariously before falling onto its side, the impact causing a visible dent. "Excuse me," Amara said, stepping forward. "Could you handle that more carefully?" Frank shrugged, not bothering to meet her eyes. "It's just a bag," he muttered, grabbing it again and tossing it back onto the belt. Amara's jaw tightened. "It's not just a bag, it's my property. Please treat it with respect." Frank gave her a dismissive wave and turned his attention to the next passenger. Amara took a deep breath, her grip tightening on the handle of her carry-on. She wanted to demand an apology, to insist on better treatment, but she knew it would only escalate the situation. Instead, she walked away, her back straight and her chin high. At the boarding gate, Amara presented her ticket to the agent, a middle-aged man named Peter, who wore an air of practiced efficiency. He scanned her ticket and paused, his brow furrowing as he examined it closely. "First class, huh?" Peter said, his tone laced with skepticism. "Yes," Amara replied, her voice calm but firm. "Is there an issue?" Peter shook his head, though his expression said otherwise. "No issue. Just double-checking," he said, waving her through. As Amara walked toward the jet bridge, she overheard Peter muttering to his colleague. "Probably some kind of charity case," he said, chuckling softly. The comment stung, but Amara kept moving. She had learned long ago that dignity was her greatest weapon. She stepped onto the plane and was greeted by Claire, a flight attendant with a bright smile that faltered when she saw Amara. "Welcome aboard," Claire said, her tone polite but noticeably strained. "May I see your ticket?" Amara handed over the ticket, suppressing a sigh. "This is the third time I've shown it." Claire glanced at it briefly before returning it. Right this way, she said, gesturing toward the first-class cabin. As Amara settled into her seat, she couldn't shake the sense of being watched. The whispers and glances continued, a symphony of subtle microaggressions that filled the cabin. She glanced out the window, hoping to distract herself, but what she saw made her heart sink. Outside, on the tarmac, her suitcase was being loaded onto the plane. One of the handlers, a burly man with a bored expression, hoisted it into the air and dropped it carelessly onto the cart. The force of the impact caused the zipper to split slightly, revealing the contents inside. Amara pressed the call button above her seat, her calm demeanor beginning to crack. A flight attendant named Rick approached, his expression already lined with annoyance. "Yes, ma'am?" Rick said, his tone implying that her concern was a nuisance. "That's my suitcase," Amara said, pointing out the window. "They just dropped it, and it looks damaged." Rick barely glanced at the luggage. "It's just a bag," he said dismissively. "It'll be fine." "It's not just a bag," Amara said, her voice rising slightly. "It's my property, and it's been mishandled." Rick sighed audibly, his irritation evident. "I'll make a note," he said, turning to leave. "No," Amara said firmly, standing from her seat. "I want to speak to your supervisor." The surrounding passengers began to take notice, some craning their necks to watch the unfolding scene. Rick hesitated, then gestured for another flight attendant to join them. As the murmurs grew louder, Amara felt a surge of resolve. She had stayed silent for too long, endured too much. Today, she would make her voice heard, and in 9 minutes everything would change. The unveiling storm. As the plane door closed and the cabin lights dimmed for takeoff, Amara returned to her seat, her mind buzzing with a mixture of frustration and resolve. The whispered insults, dismissive attitudes, and outright mishandling of her belongings weren't new experiences, but they had taken on a sharper edge today. She glanced out the window, watching as the luggage handlers disappeared from view, and resolved to remain composed. The engines roared to life, and the plane ascended into the sky, piercing through thick clouds. The familiar hum of cruising altitude filled the cabin, but the tension around Amara was palpable. Her fingers hovered over her phone, the weight of her next move heavy in her hands. She was waiting for the right moment, not out of fear, but strategy. Timing was everything. The flight attendants began their rounds, distributing beverages and snacks to first-class passengers. Rick and Claire moved with mechanical precision, their smiles plastered on for the other travelers, but fading entirely when they reached Amara. "Would you like a drink, ma'am?" Rick asked, his tone clipped. "Just water," Amara replied, her voice steady but firm. Rick returned moments later, placing the glass on her tray table with a little more force than necessary. The water sloshed against the sides, droplets spilling onto the table. Amara raised an eyebrow but said nothing, simply reaching for a napkin to clean up the mess. The interactions continued to ripple with tension. Claire passed by with a tray of snacks and deliberately skipped Amara's row, only to double back when another passenger called her out. "You missed her," the man in the adjacent seat said, gesturing toward Amara. "Oh, I must have overlooked it," Claire said, her tone falsely sweet. "What would you like?" Amara's lips curled into a small smile. "I'll have the fruit platter, please." Claire handed it to her without a word, her face flushing as she walked away. Amara felt the eyes of her fellow passengers on her, some watching with curiosity, others with pity, but she ignored them. She had no interest in being a spectacle, at least, not yet. The seeds of suspicion. As the flight continued, Amara noticed the murmurs among the flight attendants becoming louder. Rick and Claire huddled near the galley, their voices low, but their glances unmistakably aimed in her direction. She caught snippets of their conversation, the words demanding, entitled, and troublemaker floating through the air. Amara's seatmate, an older woman named Eleanor, leaned over with a sympathetic smile. "Don't let them get to you, dear," she said, her voice kind but tinged with frustration. "Some people can't see past their own ignorance." "Thank you," Amara said softly, her smile genuine. "But don't worry, I've dealt with worse." Eleanor nodded knowingly, her silver hair catching the cabin's soft light. "I can tell you've got something up your sleeve," she said with a wink. "I'll be rooting for you." Amara chuckled, her spirits lifted slightly by the woman's support. She reached for her notebook, a leather-bound journal she always carried, and began jotting down thoughts. The act of writing calmed her, centering her focus on the task ahead. The power play begins. Midway through the flight, Amara decided the time was right. She pressed the call button, and Claire approached, her face already set in an expression of impatience. "Yes, ma'am?" Claire said, her voice tight. "I'd like to speak with the head of cabin crew," Amara said, her tone polite but firm. Claire blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Is there an issue?" "There have been multiple issues," Amara replied, her eyes locking with Claire's. "And I believe it's time they were addressed." Claire hesitated before nodding. "I'll inform them." Moments later, a tall woman in a sharp uniform approached. Her name tag read Monica, senior crew member. Monica exuded authority, her stride confident and her demeanor professional. "Good afternoon, ma'am," Monica said. "I'm Monica, the senior cabin crew member. I understand you've requested to speak with me?" "Yes," Amara said, motioning for Monica to sit across from her. The woman obliged, her expression neutral but curious. Amara began recounting her experiences, detailing the dismissive behavior from the ground staff, the mishandling of her luggage, and the microaggressions she had endured from the flight attendants. Her voice was calm, measured, but there was no mistaking the weight of her words. "I don't expect special treatment," Amara concluded. "But I do expect to be treated with basic respect. And that has not been the case today." Monica's expression shifted as she listened, a mixture of surprise and discomfort crossing her face. "I'm deeply sorry for your experience, ma'am," she said after a pause. "I assure you, this is not reflective of our airline's values. I will address this matter immediately." "I appreciate your apology," Amara said. "But actions speak louder than words. I'll be documenting this incident thoroughly, and I expect to see follow-through." Monica nodded, her composure faltering slightly under Amara's unwavering gaze. "Of course, ma'am. I'll personally ensure that your concerns are escalated to the highest level." The revelation. As Monica rose to leave, Amara allowed herself a small smile. The stage was set, but the real moment of truth was yet to come. She reached for her phone, opening a secure app with a few quick taps. Her thumb hovered over the screen before she pressed send. 9 minutes later, a ripple of activity began to spread through the cabin. Rick and Claire were called into the galley, their faces pale as they returned to their stations. Monica reappeared, her expression unreadable as she approached Amara. "Ms. Grant," Monica said, her voice quieter than before. "Would you mind stepping into the galley for a moment? There's someone on the line who wishes to speak with you." Amara stood, smoothing her suit as she followed Monica to the small galley. Monica handed her a phone, the line already active. Amara brought it to her ear, her lips curling into a confident smile as she recognized the voice on the other end. "Ms. Grant," the voice said, warm and professional. "I just received your report. Rest assured, we're handling this situation immediately." "Thank you," Amara said. "I trust you'll ensure the necessary changes are made." As she returned to her seat, the cabin was abuzz with whispers. Passengers and crew alike sensed that something monumental was unfolding, though none could quite pinpoint what. Amara sat back, her composure as serene as ever, but the glint in her eyes spoke volumes. This was only the beginning. The full weight of her influence had yet to be felt, and the flight crew was about to learn that the woman they had dismissed wasn't just another passenger, she was a force to be reckoned with. The tension in the cabin thickened as Amara returned to her seat, the weight of unspoken truths settling over the first-class section like a storm about to break. The other passengers watched her, their curiosity barely concealed. Some exchanged glances, while others whispered among themselves. Amara met their gazes with an unwavering calm, her silence speaking louder than any words. The flight attendants, too, were visibly unsettled. Rick avoided looking in her direction altogether, his movements stilted as he prepared for the next round of service. Claire, usually quick to plaster on a professional smile, now moved about the cabin with an air of caution, her eyes darting toward Amara every few moments as if expecting something to happen. Monica, the senior crew member, lingered near the galley, her posture rigid and her expression tight, as though she were bracing for impact. Amara remained composed, her focus trained on the clouds outside the window. The phone call in the galley had been brief, but its significance was profound. She hadn't just spoken to anyone, she had spoken to the CEO of the airline, a man who owed his position in part to her influence. That detail, however, was not yet known to anyone on board. As the minutes ticked by, the subtle signs of disruption began to ripple through the cabin. A flight attendant from the economy section, clearly summoned for support, appeared in the first-class cabin. She whispered something to Monica, who nodded curtly. The two exchanged glances, their unease palpable, before the attendant retreated. Monica, visibly flustered, made her way to the flight deck, disappearing through the cockpit door. Amara allowed herself a small, private smile. The dominoes were beginning to fall. It wasn't long before the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've been informed of an important development during this flight. Please remain seated as we continue our journey. Thank you for your cooperation." The announcement, cryptic as it was, sent a wave of murmurs through the cabin. Amara noted the shift in atmosphere with quiet satisfaction. The power dynamics aboard the plane were shifting, though the crew was still unaware of just how much. Rick, emboldened perhaps by the growing tension, approached Amara's seat with a tray of drinks. His attempt at regaining control was clumsy, his forced smile barely masking his frustration. "Would you care for another drink, ma'am?" he asked, his tone dripping with insincerity. Amara looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "No, thank you," she said simply, her calm demeanor unnerving him further. He lingered for a moment, as though searching for a way to reassert his authority, but ultimately retreated. Amara's restraint, her refusal to be provoked, was a weapon in itself. She knew that every act of composure chipped away at their confidence, leaving them increasingly off balance. Meanwhile, the whispers among the passengers grew louder. One man, seated across the aisle, leaned over to his companion. "Did you see how the crew's been acting around her? Something's definitely up." "I heard she called the senior crew member earlier," another passenger chimed in. "And then Monica went straight to the cockpit. Whatever's happening, it's big." Amara tuned out the speculation, her mind focused on the steps ahead. She had orchestrated this moment carefully, knowing that patience and precision were key. The crew's behavior had set the stage, now, it was time for the curtain to rise. The moment came when the plane began its descent. Monica returned to the cabin, her face pale, but resolute. She approached Amara with a nervous energy, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Ms. Grant," Monica said, her voice low but steady. "We've just received a message from corporate. They've informed us of your position within the company. On behalf of the entire crew, I'd like to extend our sincerest apologies for the treatment you've received during this flight." The announcement landed like a thunderclap. Passengers around them fell silent, their eyes widening in disbelief. Rick, who had been standing near the galley, froze mid-step, his expression one of pure shock. Claire, who had been avoiding eye contact with Amara since the start of the flight, turned a deep shade of red. Amara inclined her head slightly, her gaze sharp as it swept over the crew. "I appreciate the apology," she said, her tone measured. "However, apologies without action are meaningless. I expect a full report of this incident to be submitted to corporate, along with the names of every staff member involved." Monica nodded quickly, her earlier confidence now replaced by a nervous energy. "Of course, ma'am. We'll ensure that everything is documented and addressed immediately." Amara's voice remained calm, but there was no mistaking the authority behind her words. "Good. I'll also be speaking directly with the CEO to discuss the systemic issues that allowed this behavior to occur. This is not just about me, It's about ensuring that no passenger is treated this way again." The weight of her statement hung in the air, silencing any lingering murmurs. The crew members, now fully aware of the magnitude of their misstep, exchanged panicked glances. Rick opened his mouth as though to speak, but no words came. Claire seemed rooted to the spot, her earlier bravado completely shattered. As the plane touched down and taxied to the gate, the passengers began to stir, their curiosity now a full-blown fascination. Amara's composure, her command of the situation, had left an indelible impression on everyone who had witnessed it. Eleanor, her seatmate, leaned over with a conspiratorial smile. "I knew you had something up your sleeve," she said. "You handled that beautifully." Amara chuckled softly, her expression softening. "Sometimes, the best way to fight back is to let the truth speak for itself." The cabin doors opened, and passengers began to disembark. Amara waited until the aisle was clear before rising from her seat. As she moved toward the exit, she was greeted by the airline's ground staff, who had been summoned to escort her personally. Their expressions were a mixture of deference and embarrassment, their earlier dismissiveness replaced by a keen awareness of her importance. Before stepping off the plane, Amara turned back to the crew. "Remember this moment," she said, her voice steady but firm. "It's not just about me, it's about every passenger you serve. Treat them with the respect they deserve, no matter who they are." With that, she exited the plane, her steps as confident as they had been when she first entered the airport. The crowd of passengers lingering near the gate parted instinctively, their faces a mixture of admiration and awe. Amara walked past them without hesitation, her focus already on the next steps she would take to ensure that this incident became a turning point, not just for the airline, but for the industry as a whole. As she disappeared into the terminal, the whispers began anew, spreading like wildfire among the passengers and crew alike. The story of the composed, elegant woman who had faced disrespect and turned the tables on her oppressors would undoubtedly become a legend, a reminder that dignity and justice were forces to be reckoned with. And for Amara, this was only the beginning. The moment Amara stepped into the terminal, the weight of the flight began to lift from her shoulders, replaced by a steely resolve. She had accomplished her immediate goal, but the battle was far from over. This wasn't just about one flight, one crew, or even one airline. This was about dismantling the pervasive culture of disrespect and bias that had shadowed her life and the lives of countless others. As she made her way through the bustling terminal, a man in a tailored suit approached her, his demeanor professional but anxious. "Ms. Grant," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Marcus, the regional director for the airline. I was informed of the situation during your flight. I'm here to personally escort you to our corporate lounge while we arrange for a meeting with our senior leadership." Amara studied him for a moment, noting the tension in his jaw and the slight sheen of sweat on his brow. "Thank you, Marcus," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I'll accept your offer, but I want to make it clear that I expect this meeting to result in actionable steps, not just empty platitudes." Marcus nodded quickly. "Absolutely, ma'am. We take these matters very seriously." As they walked through the terminal, Amara couldn't help but notice the stares and whispers that followed her. News of the incident had spread rapidly, fueled by passengers who had witnessed the confrontation and likely shared it on social media. The phones pointed in her direction were a testament to how quickly stories could go viral. Amara ignored them, her focus unshaken. She had more important matters to attend to. The corporate lounge was a stark contrast to the chaos of the terminal, quiet, luxurious, and impeccably designed. Marcus led her to a private meeting room, where a small group of executives was already waiting. Among them was Evelyn Parker, the airline's chief operating officer, a woman known for her sharp intellect and no-nonsense approach to leadership. "Ms. Grant," Evelyn said, rising from her seat and extending her hand. "I want to personally apologize for the treatment you experienced on your flight. It was unacceptable, and I assure you, we are committed to addressing it." Amara shook her hand, her gaze steady. "I appreciate the apology, Ms. Parker, but words alone won't fix the systemic issues at play here. This wasn't an isolated incident, it's a reflection of a larger problem within your organization. Evelyn nodded, gesturing for Amara to sit. You're absolutely right. We've already begun reviewing the incident and taking steps to address it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on how we can make meaningful changes. Amara sat across from the group, her posture poised but commanding. First and foremost, there needs to be a comprehensive review of your training programs. It's clear that your staff lacks the necessary education on cultural sensitivity, customer service, and unconscious bias. These are not optional skills, they are essential for anyone interacting with the public. Evelyn scribbled notes as Amara spoke, her expression one of intense focus. I completely agree. We'll prioritize that immediately. Second, Amara continued, your reporting mechanisms need to be more transparent and accessible. Passengers should feel empowered to report incidents without fear of being ignored or dismissed. And when complaints are filed, they need to be addressed promptly and thoroughly. Another executive, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair, chimed in. We do have a reporting system in place, but perhaps it's not as user-friendly as it could be. We'll look into revamping it. Amara's gaze shifted to him, her expression sharp. Revamping it isn't enough. You need to ensure that the people handling those reports are trained to take them seriously and to act on them appropriately. Accountability has to be a cornerstone of your process. The man nodded, his confidence faltering under her scrutiny. Understood. Finally, Amara said, her tone firm, there needs to be a visible commitment to diversity and inclusion at all levels of your organization. That includes hiring practices, promotions, and leadership development programs. Your company's culture starts at the top, and if your leadership doesn't reflect the diversity of your customer base, these problems will persist. The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. Evelyn was the first to speak, her voice resolute. You're absolutely right, Ms. Grant. We've made strides in some areas, but it's clear we have a long way to go. I'll personally oversee the implementation of these initiatives, and I'd like to work with you to ensure we're addressing the root causes of these issues. Amara raised an eyebrow. You want me to consult? Yes, Evelyn said without hesitation. Your insights are invaluable, and your experience gives you a perspective we need. If you're willing, I'd like to formalize this partnership. Amara considered the offer. It wasn't what she had expected, but it was an opportunity to create real, lasting change. I'll agree to consult, she said finally, but only under the condition that I have full autonomy to speak candidly and that my recommendations are given serious consideration. Done, Evelyn said, extending her hand once more. Welcome aboard, Ms. Grant. As the meeting concluded, Amara felt a sense of satisfaction, but she knew this was only the beginning. The real work lay ahead, transforming the airline's culture from the inside out. She left the meeting with a renewed sense of purpose, her mind already racing with ideas for her new role. By the time she exited the lounge, the terminal was buzzing with activity. Reporters had gathered near the security checkpoint, their cameras poised and their microphones ready. Word of her involvement with the airline had spread, and the media was eager for a statement. Amara paused, taking a deep breath, before stepping into the spotlight. The questions came at her in rapid-fire succession, each one more probing than the last. Ms. Grant, can you confirm that you're now working with the airline? What changes do you plan to implement? Do you think this incident will lead to broader reforms in the industry? Amara raised a hand, silencing the crowd. I'll say this, today was a reminder that change is long overdue, not just within this airline, but across the industry as a whole. My goal is to ensure that no passenger, regardless of their background, is ever made to feel unwelcome or disrespected. I'm committed to working with the airline to make that vision a reality. The reporters continued to shout questions, but Amara didn't linger. She had said what needed to be said. As she walked away, her phone buzzed with notifications, emails, messages, and social media mentions pouring in from people around the world who had heard her story. Many were sharing their own experiences, thanking her for speaking up, and expressing hope that her efforts would spark a larger movement. Amara spent the rest of the day reviewing the flood of messages, her determination growing with each story she read. It was clear that the problem extended far beyond a single airline. This was a systemic issue, and she was in a unique position to challenge it. That evening, as she sat in her hotel room overlooking the city, Amara drafted an open letter to the airline's board of directors. She outlined her vision for a more inclusive, customer-focused organization and proposed a series of concrete steps to achieve it. The letter was direct, uncompromising, and rooted in the belief that meaningful change was not only possible, but necessary. She hit send, knowing that her journey was just beginning. The fight for justice and respect was far from over, but Amara was ready for whatever came next. She had faced adversity before, and each time, she had emerged stronger. This time would be no different. The next morning, Amara woke to a flood of notifications. Overnight, her story had become a lightning rod for conversations about bias, respect, and accountability in the airline industry and beyond. News outlets covered the incident with headlines like "Passenger Takes Stand Against Airline Bias" and "Amara Grant, the Woman Redefining Air Travel Standards." Social media was ablaze with support, testimonials from others who had experienced similar mistreatment, and a few predictable detractors questioning the validity of her experience. Amara didn't let the negativity deter her. She had a mission, and it was bigger than herself. As she sipped her morning coffee, her phone buzzed with a call from Evelyn Parker. "Good morning, Ms. Grant," Evelyn began, her tone a mix of professionalism and respect. "I wanted to inform you that the board has unanimously approved your consulting proposal. We'd like to begin as soon as possible." "Excellent," Amara replied, her voice calm but purposeful. "I've already drafted an initial outline of steps we can take to address the issues we discussed yesterday. I'll send it over this morning." "That's wonderful to hear," Evelyn said. "We're also planning a company-wide announcement to address the incident and outline our commitment to change. We'd like you to be part of it if you're comfortable." Amara paused for a moment. Publicly aligning herself with the airline was a risk, but it was also an opportunity to amplify her message. "I'll participate," she said. "But I want the announcement to focus on the broader issues, not just this one incident. This is about systemic change, not damage control." "Understood," Evelyn agreed. "We'll follow your lead." By the time Amara arrived at the airline's corporate headquarters later that day, the atmosphere was charged with a mix of anticipation and tension. Executives, department heads, and employees from all levels of the organization had been summoned for a town hall meeting. The large auditorium buzzed with whispered conversations as people filed in, many curious about the woman who had not only challenged the airline's practices, but now stood poised to help transform them. Amara stepped onto the stage alongside Evelyn and the CEO, her posture straight and her expression composed. The murmurs in the room quieted as the CEO took the microphone, delivering a brief introduction and acknowledgement of the recent events. He then turned the floor over to Amara, who stepped forward with a confidence born of purpose. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice clear and steady. "I stand here today not as a critic, but as an advocate for change. My experience on Flight 384 was not an isolated incident. It was a reflection of broader systemic issues that affect not just this airline, but the entire industry." She paused, letting her words sink in. The audience was silent, their attention riveted. "I've spent my career advocating for fairness, respect, and inclusion in spaces where those values are too often absent. What happened to me was unacceptable, but it also presented an opportunity to shine a light on the gaps in our systems and to demand better, not just for myself, but for every passenger who entrusts their safety and comfort to this airline." Amara's voice grew stronger as she outlined her vision for change. She spoke about the importance of mandatory cultural sensitivity training for all employees, from the ground crew to senior executives. She emphasized the need for transparent reporting systems and accountability measures. She called for hiring practices that prioritize diversity and leadership development programs to ensure that underrepresented voices were included at decision-making levels. "As a consultant to this airline, I will work tirelessly to implement these changes," she concluded. "But this is not a task I can accomplish alone. It requires all of us, every employee, every leader, every stakeholder, to commit to a culture of respect and inclusion. This is not just about improving service, it's about restoring trust and building an organization we can all be proud of. When she finished, the room erupted into applause. Some employees stood, clapping with a fervor that indicated more than just politeness, they were inspired. Amara stepped back as Evelyn took the stage, outlining the concrete steps the airline would take in partnership with Amara. It was clear that this was not merely a public relations exercise, but a genuine commitment to change. In the weeks that followed, Amara immersed herself in her new role. She worked closely with the airline's leadership team to develop and implement her proposed initiatives. She conducted workshops with employees at all levels, fostering open and honest discussions about bias, respect, and customer service. She collaborated with HR to redesign hiring and promotion processes, ensuring that the airline's workforce became more reflective of the diverse customer base it served. Her work extended beyond the airline itself. Amara became a sought-after speaker, addressing industry conferences and advocacy groups about the importance of equity and accountability in customer-facing industries. Her story sparked a broader movement, inspiring other companies to re-evaluate their practices and prioritize respect and inclusion. Through it all, Amara remained grounded, never losing sight of the values that had driven her from the start. She continued to receive messages from people around the world, passengers, employees, and advocates, who shared their own experiences and thanked her for being a voice for change. Each story reinforced her belief that her fight was not just necessary, but urgent. Months later, Amara found herself back at the airport, preparing to board another flight. This time, the experience was markedly different. As she approached the check-in counter, the staff greeted her with genuine smiles, their professionalism unmarred by bias or condescension. Her luggage was handled with care, and the boarding process was smooth and respectful. As she settled into her seat in the first-class cabin, a young flight attendant approached her. "Ms. Grant," she said, her voice tinged with both respect and admiration. "I just wanted to say thank you. Because of you, I feel proud to work here." Amara smiled, her heart swelling with a quiet sense of accomplishment. "Thank you," she replied. "That means a lot." As the plane ascended into the clouds, Amara gazed out the window, her thoughts drifting to the journey that had brought her to this moment. It hadn't been easy, and there was still much work to be done, but she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had turned a moment of adversity into a catalyst for change, proving that dignity and determination could transform even the most entrenched systems. The fight was far from over, but Amara was ready. She had found her purpose, and she knew that no matter how turbulent the journey, she would always rise above.